Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me to answer those questions today is Stephen Wayne, founder and owner of Benjamin Stevens London Agents. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And joining Stephen is Simon Taylor, co-founder of Empty Property Hunters. Welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there we are, gents. Let's get on with the questions. And Simon, you're going to go first. Even in parts of London, the number of seemingly empty or derelict houses appears to be on the increase. Is there any particular reason or cause of this, especially as we're experiencing a housing crisis?
There are a number of things going on at the moment that is a massive roadblock is probate. So sadly, when somebody passes away and the family are dealing with the administrating of an estate, it can be very cumbersome. It can be tedious and take an awful long time. And of course, there are families that we come across who've perhaps kicked the can down the road and they've not wanted to perhaps tend to the affairs of the estate of their loved one. So all of a sudden, when you combine that emotional aspect with the practicalities of the legal hoops that one has to go through, all of a sudden 18 months, 2 years, 3 years can pass. And of course, if one doesn't cut their grass for that period of time, things can start to decay and look a little bit overgrown and forlorn. There's, of course, in London, principally, you've got so many properties that are maps owned by overseas landlords and investors, some of which sadly is purposely left empty. But then, of course, there's people up and down the country who are, life happens, and that might mean a job relocation to another part of the country or overseas. Perhaps there's an emotional attachment to a property that's maybe been owned by a loved one that you don't want to quite let go to yet. And before you know it, time passes by so quickly. And well, in London, there's 13% more long-term empty properties in 2025 than there were in 2024. So when you combine everything together, it creates an issue.
Let me just push back on something that we discussed in an earlier programme, Simon, which is your point, and I agree with you that it's the right thing to do in most cases, which is local authorities imposing penalties by increased levels of council tax to discourage empty property. But let me just bring up 2 points. One, there you mentioned probate. So if probate was taking an inordinate amount of time, would it be fair to penalise those families who are going to eventually be in receipt of the funds of that probate by increasing council tax? That's one question. And I suppose secondly, where we're in such a volatile market with a lot of London properties going down quite significantly, it might be that you just can't, as you said, you might have moved for work, but you can't sell your property because the market isn't there to make that sale. Now, I know the easy answer to that is say, well, reduce the price and you'll sell it, which is probably Steve's advice. But some people can't just do that because they can't afford the negative equity that would create. So how would you deal with those two situations if the council started to come along and say, well, we're going to penalise you now for this property being empty?
Well, there's a lot going on there, but let me unpack a few things. First of all, if your property is in probate, and there is some compassionate leave from stamp duty, from council tax. There's an exemption, which is fair, and I don't think anybody's ever going to argue.
And that's nationwide, is it?
That's nationwide. Also, if you're unfortunate enough to go to prison, your property is exempt from council tax. Which not a lot of people know, but there you are.
How do you know?
I'm going to say it's probably not the most ideal way of alleviating it.
No, I'm not speaking from experience. And then there's something known as Band G. So if your property is totally and utterly dilapidated, falling apart, the chimney's fallen onto the roof, there's a hole in the roof, there is no council tax to pay there, which I don't think is necessarily right, because that's not necessarily incentivizing people to put the properties back into repair.
What happens is if the price of your property drops so much?
So of course, well, the market is the market, and I suspect any local authority will just simply shrug their shoulders. And if you are living elsewhere in another part of the country and you're wanting to wait for the market to catch up with a figure that maybe suits you, well then, don't use the property, utilize it, sweat the asset, and have it rented with a tenant coming in, which is good for the market, good for the housing the world of housing in general, and you've got an income coming in to service any mortgage that might be on the property. So that's what I would suggest in that instance.
Any comments, Stephen?
Yeah, look, as the old age question is, oh, I need this, but my property's only getting this. Well, the market does give you the answer, but there are things you can do for a property. You know, I've seen properties where someone's gone in over a weekend and given it a lick of paint, go down to IKEA and furnish it. So, you know, when a property doesn't sell, there's always, you know, change agents, you know, you don't need to necessarily change the price down, but you can change a marketing strategy. So, for example, property's on at 320, you can go often in excess of 300 rather than bringing it down. You try and change the angle. So there's always something you can do. But I think a lot of people who get, you know, the amount of people where we get, but they've been on the market for 6-9 months, they're not getting anywhere. And actually sometimes just a bit of fresh energy and a bit of fresh impetus actually gets that property sold. Unfortunately, we live in a very lazy industry. And unfortunately, when estate agents don't sell a house, the easy answer is bring your price down. But there are many other things you can do, you know, to get that interest moving.
Yeah, but that's not always the answer, is it? Because sometimes you can drop the price and it still doesn't work. But
no, look, I tell you one thing where we, you know, really struggle with, and it sort of links to what Simon does, is old, you know, retirement homes. You know, at one point we had my great aunt left, you know, passed away, and she left it to the family. And for love nor money, we couldn't sell this property. And there's nothing worse than trying to sell a family property. My sister-in-law just asked me if I want to sell their house. I was like, I couldn't think of anything worse. You know, it's just not worth. But you know, that market is very hard, and you keep bringing it down, down, down. There's only a certain amount of people who want that house. So in certain situations, it is what it is, and you just have to be patient. But you know, if you've got things like auctions now, you can look at auctions becoming a very popular way of selling a property. So for every excuse someone gives me why they can't sell, I could probably give them 10 answers what to change.
if an agent comes to you and says, well, the simple answer is drop the price. My test of that is to say to the agent, well, okay, that's lovely. I'm hearing what you say. Can you just show me what else you could give me that I could buy from you at the low price that you're suggesting I sell mine for? So in other words, you then get some comparison of what you're being asked to do, rather than just a very flip answer, reduce the price.
Yeah, look, the problem with estate agency is there's no real science to a value. You know, it's a ballpark, it's an idea, and it's about how we market. So just turning around and saying your price is too high is lazy. But also, on the same word, sometimes someone turns around and goes, we'll drop it by £5,000, which is not going to make any difference. You know, you have to, you know, if you're going to drop, you need to look at the brackets on the portals and see actually what's going to be done. But there are so many things that can be done first. Now, some agents, the good agents, have done, you know, the videos of social media, they've called it out, they've done an open day, they've had, you know, the question is also how many people you had through the door. If no one's wanted to go and view it, well, that's one problem. But if you've had 30 people through the door and no one's interested, well, that's a whole nother problem, because there's obviously a reason that they saw it online, they like the look of it, but actually they weren't prepared to make an offer.
Stephen, your question. Rents, particularly across the capitals, still seem to be spiralling. Do the panel think that it may be time to reconsider the implementation of rental caps?
So, contrary to belief, they're not. I don't think they're spiraling like they were. I think 12 months ago it was out of control. Like we were seeing crazy rents, but I think the last year it has softened slightly. I think people have just realised they can't afford it, because the problem with rentals is, you know, everyone wants a rent insurance policy, but God forbid they have bad tenants that they can claim. So there is a formula that you need to earn 30 times the rent. So if you wanted to rent for, say, £1,000 a month, you'd need to earn £30,000 a year. So there has to be some level, because what you can't have is you can't have a 1-bedroom flat renting for so much that no one can actually afford to pass the referencing. So that there's almost like a natural cap, because you can only go so high. You know, I've always said, and I don't know if I've said this before on your program, but rentals is a real science. It's a really easy job, but we make it look really hard. But if something's worth £1,000, everyone knows it's worth £1,000, and the landlord wants to charge £1,200, well, you're only going to get desperate people. It's like a loaf of bread. If you're starving and you know a loaf of bread's £1, you're not going to pay £1.50. But if you're desperate, you will. And what a lot of landlords do is, by overcharging for rents, they end up with bad tenants. Because when you're a lawyer, a banker, or a good person, a school teacher, someone with a good income who can show good history, you know, you'll be like, well, I'm a good tenant, I'm not going to overpay. Where actually landlords almost encourage bad tenants and problems by accepting silly money from tenants who aren't necessarily the best tenants. And actually with our business, it's all about the right tenants. So it's not quite as crazy as everyone thinks it is out there.
Just coming to that point, one of the comments that we've heard in the studio here several times is that because of the restriction on the amount of deposit that you can pay, and that the now inability to pay, say, 12 months up front on rental, it will actually stop a lot of people who don't qualify to hit these insurance policies on guaranteed rent.
Yeah, so
it will preclude them from being able to rent a property.
Yeah, which is good, because the reality is, if you're earning £100,000, you're not going to be renting probably. You're going to want to get on the ladder. It's the people, unfortunately, the youngsters and people who are struggling financially, who are the people who rent. So there's almost like this naturalness. But that talking about you won't be able to, with the Renters' Right Bill coming in, that's insane what they've done in regards to you can't pay your rent up front, because there are people who, are retired, who show no income.
Or perhaps been living abroad. And
people who've been living abroad.
Yeah.
People who, are sick, who aren't earning, and that was almost a comfort blanket. If, look, I'm having problems, I'm struggling, I'll pay up front. And almost the government have almost turned around to all those people and been like, well, good luck. Those people are not going to be able to rent. And actually the government are going to cause an absolute massive problem for themselves with that one rule. So most of it I sort of don't disagree with, but that one thing where you can't pay up your rent up front it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Agreed. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when I'll be asking Stephen and Simon more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time, and I'm joined today by Simon Taylor and Stephen Wayne. Welcome back, both of you.
Thank you.
Simon, in some European countries, the number of properties a developer is allowed to sell to foreigners is limited. Do the experts think that such a regulation here would help ease the housing crisis?
It's of course great that foreign investors see the UK as an attractive destination for an investment. And of course, we live in a highly globalized world these days. And traditionally, you've got many from Asia who've perhaps bought off plan, bought investments, bought properties for their children who are perhaps passing through London, studying, etc., and staying longer. I do think, though, which is great, which is to be encouraged. But I do think, though, a couple of things. Is it fair against the backdrop of a housing crisis and a housing shortage that somebody from wherever they might be in the world is able to come here and buy wholesale? And by that I mean 5 units, 10 units, 15 units. I'm all for investment, but I think maybe a limit of 1 or 2 per investor, to me, sounds fair, right? It sounds rational. I would also go a step further, is because there's lots of stories of investors who've perhaps bought from overseas, bought in London and provincial cities in the UK, and are perhaps keeping it empty, not wanting to rent it out. And I think that should be disincentivized. And what I would perhaps suggest doing is that, okay, if you're going to be buying, a Chinese investor, Hong Kong, is coming over here and is buying, we want to incentivize them to use it. So perhaps there's, a condition of them buying off plan or buying in a development is for the first 3 years or 5 years, the property has to be rented out. It's quite simple. Now that might act as a disincentive for some, but many might just sort of shrug their shoulders and say, okay, well, if I'm not, I can put my own child in there or family member in there, but I can't just keep it empty.
I'm not a landlord, but if I was, and I didn't, if I'd bought a property for investment, hoping for inflation to take the price up, and maybe I think I've taken a punt on it because it'll be worth more in 2 or 3 years' time, I might not want a tenant effectively wearing out my property and causing me to have to refurb it after 3 or 4 years. And I think it'd be a little unfair to inflict that on somebody. But what I could get with was one of your earlier points, is if you had perhaps a special rate of council tax for people who were overseas investors and then didn't utilise the property. You could have a special tax there, surely, or a special category.
The difficulty with that is, of course, you're going to have the politics of envy, and you could have somebody that's living in the 3 floors down who's a hardworking person. They're paying 1 council tax, and you've got the overseas investor who's perhaps paying less tax than the UK citizen. That doesn't necessarily seem fair to me. But what I would say is the investor, should they not want to rent the property out, fine, no problem at all. If that's what you want to do, fill your boots, but you're going to have to pay a premium penalty for purposely keeping it empty. But I would dress it up as something else rather than incentivizing a council tax and reducing it to beneath what perhaps others are paying within the building.
No, I wasn't suggesting it'd be less. I was suggesting it'd be more, but restricted to non-resident owners. I mean, again, you know, the government say, oh, they do have a lot of problem, which is why the rule was introduced where overseas landlords pay a set amount of tax deducted by the agent, because it's difficult chasing them for the taxation on the money. But I think the easy answer to that we could have had in a simpler form. I think, again, in a lot of European countries, if you buy a property, you have to appoint a resident tax advisor or representative of your estate in that country, one that's there, so that actually if they don't organise you paying the tax, they have to pay it. And I think that's, you know, quite a sensible idea. You know, we need responsible owners, don't we? I mean, that's the key to it all. You know, not just people who are going to buy a property, stick it on the shelf and just hope that prices.
I think if someone buys a property, it's sort of down to them what they want to do with it. And I don't think it's really fair to impose a reason. And you also, someone could come into this country with all good intentions of buying a property to visit 3 times a year and spend their money here. You know, and things change in life. And I don't think it's particularly fair to, you know, to restrict people to telling them what to do with their homes, you know, in the nicest way.
Well, that's why I think, you know, forcing to rent is a bit of a...
I don't think you could force anyone to do anything.
I don't think so.
And I don't think you'd have the developers very happy by having the clients who buy 5 and 6, and you turn around to them and go, well, they only want to buy 1. They're only allowed to buy 1. Because those people end up thinking, well, actually, I don't really want to buy 1 there and 1 there and 1 there. I like to have 6 in one place because it's actually easier for them to manage and to look after.
I'm sorry, gents, I'm going to have to be controversial and say, listen, there is a deep housing crisis and shortage, and it's just criminal to be keeping them empty. And some incentives need to be, some sticks, I think, need to be brought in. Will do no harm.
Listen, I agree with you. Nobody is more keen than I to see young people getting on the ladder. That does mean that we need extra stock. We need houses that are available at prices they can afford. But I think you do have to ask the question as to whether those people, say, from overseas that are investing in London in particular, which is the majority of those investments, I guess, and Manchester or perhaps Birmingham too, are they the properties that would actually help the first-time buyers? I think probably not.
No, I agree. And I think there's also a big difference between a property in a residential road which is derelict and is causing the neighbours stress and pain, and a property where a Chinese investor has bought and it's perfectly clean, it's perfectly kept, their service charge and their council tax are up to date, but they just choose not to, you know, they have all rights to buy a property and keep. There's a big difference between a property that someone chooses to keep empty and a property that is sitting there empty, rotting.
Oh, well, I'm sure we could go round and round on this one for a
certainly
long time. Yeah, so I was stopping you there. Okay, Stephen, your question. Now that the budget has passed, do the experts think that the market will experience a post-budget bounce? If not, why not?
No, it won't, because they delayed their budget by a month. And if we were sitting here and it was October, we would have this beautiful bounce. But today is the 1st of December. The budget has just been done and everyone's gone through it all and realised that.
And still everybody arguing about.
Not much, but there wasn't really much, to be honest, of any interest to anyone in it.
No.
It wasn't radical enough to upset people. It wasn't radical enough to actually do anything. So come January, yes, there'll definitely be a bounce and there's definitely going to be a little bit more activity. But we almost operate in a 10-month year in the estate agency and the property market. December is normally quiet. August is normally notoriously quiet. So the problem is, by them moving the budget back, which for some reason suited them, it doesn't suit the property market, because what's not going to happen now is someone go, the budget's done, I'm going to start and I'm going to buy a house tomorrow. So what's going to happen is all those people who thought about, I was going to do something, and they use the budget as a stopgap, they'll probably wait till January. So yes, there will be, but it's going to be delayed by about 6 weeks, which is really annoying for us.
And how big will the bounce be?
It's just a gentle bounce. It's not going to go a crazy bounce. But it just, the problem with the budget is the budget brings in uncertainty, and uncertainty stops everything. And that's what the budget has done to the property market. I had someone who was going to exchange on the day of the budget and they wouldn't exchange, and they exchanged at 3 o'clock once the budget was over and done with, and he made sure that he understood everything.
Do you think that reticence to transact applies to foreigners as well? Are they that conscious about our budget?
They're conscious. Yeah, they're well aware of what's going on. They know about the budget dates, probably more than some of the people in England do, because it's going to affect them more than your average Joe in England. I think the reality is you can't do anything about it, but someone overseas can be like, well, actually, I'm going to make the decision not to come and not to buy. And the uncertainty, and the government has been awfully guilty of it lately. There's so much uncertainty, and it stops everything. And what you have to understand with the housing market, it doesn't just affect us. As Simon said earlier, it affects the builders, the decorators, the plumbers. And from property, you suddenly start getting people, you buy a house, no one buys a house and does nothing. They buy a house, they get a new sofa, they get new chairs, new dining tables. We're the beginning of the chain, not the end of it, and the uncertainty and the slowing down of things really ruins that energy, and property is about energy and about confidence.
Okay.
Well, I have to agree with every word that Stephen has said, and I can add my tuppence worth, which is, no, I think there'll be, we are literally on the ground floor of transactions trickling through. There will be little or nothing happening this side of Christmas. I think a lot of people have delayed their decisions. Then you combine that with traditionally, because property is quite seasonal, there'll be a lot of people who will be sitting around the turkey and all the trimmings at Christmas discussing what they're going to be doing. So I do think there's going to be certainly an uptick in terms of new instructions, new properties coming to the market where people have perhaps delayed matters for quite some time. Are the buyers going to be there in the volume that we would really like? The jury's out on that one, and time will tell. Yes, there's going to be activity. Yes, there's going to be an increase in what we have now. Yes, there's going to be a bounce, but I think it will be a bit muted because, Stephen mentioned the key word, which is uncertainty, and buyers from taxes, etc., and job security are a little bit nervous and cautious. So I think it would be a good time for competent agents who are able to have grown-up, civilized conversations with their clients to educate them on where the market is and where pricing needs to be, because it always boils down to price. But the price that they maybe would have got several months ago, is that going to be the price that they're going to get come January and February? I'm not too sure, but time will tell.
Okay, well, gentlemen, just 20 seconds each. Your prediction for 26?
I think it's going to be busy. I think there's almost this confidence that the interest rates have hit a point that they should now sort of level. There might be a little drop, but I think we all know where we are with things. I think the budget's out the way. We sort of know we're stuck with Labour for the next few years. And I think what I always advise to everyone, especially going to you, is you can sit and you can procrastinate and you can think and you can think. But if you want to sell and you want to move, just get on with it.
Okay. Simon, 15 seconds.
Well, the love affair with property certainly isn't lost, and concurring with Stephen, if interest rates are lower and there was no absolute shockers or skeletons in the closet after the budget, I think people will dust themselves off and get back to normal come the new year.
Okay, well, there we are. Thank you for watching. Big thank you to Simon Taylor, co-founder of Empty Property Hunters. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to Stephen Wayne, founder and owner of Benjamin Stevens London Agents.
My pleasure as always.
Great stuff. Good to see you both. See you again next time, and see you again next time. Don't forget, Property Question Time, London TV, Sky 117, every Wednesday at 7 o'clock.